Okay, I'm just going to do a video showing some of the things you can do with MaxScript in terms of like creating your own interface in MaxScript. I started using it and I just enjoyed messing with it. I thought it was really fun because you make your own little buttons and ways to enter in data and stuff like that, and it just, I don't know, it's just something fun to kind of customize your experience in a 3D editor. Now, I wanted to make a shift to Blender, and to be honest, one of the things that swayed me from not committing myself totally is the fact that I wasn't able to do the things that I could in MaxScript, like make these dialogues, which I was so fond of making. I hope they add that into the newer versions of Blender. Basically, Blender's go-to answer is basically, well, just rely on Python. Python will do it for you. And so they don't actually give you a solution. They just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, just write it in pure Python. And so you have to be like a friggin' Python wizard and understand how to do graphics programming like on a high level to actually do anything. And then you have to interface it in a more complex manner with Blender. So it is not user friendly. It's not built as a part of the API. Now, an API is a term that refers to how you interact with a program. API, I think, I haven't looked this up, but it's just off the top of my head. I believe it stands for Application Program Interface or something like that. And it's just basically how you communicate with another program. So, like, I want to program something for Blender, so I will ask Blender a question like, "Oh, can you tell me if there's any geometry rendered on the screen right now?" Right? And that's a low-level command. It's just saying, I want to know some basic information from Blender. I don't want to go to Python and do some high-level, like hardware rendering shit to figure out what's going on in the memory. I just want to ask Blender a simple question, and it has a thing called an API, which tells us, what we can ask it. And so if that's in the API, we can see that in the documentation and say, oh, to figure this out, I just have to type in blender dot look at scene, and then it would bring up whatever for us. Um, Now, in terms of the interface API, it's very limited. They have just started to add things, like you can add a drop-down now with a button, but I think that's as far as it goes. Maybe I think you can add a spinner now. But in terms of like creating your own UI or dialogue, like a float box, it's in its infancy, and um, it's kind of a bummer. And it's like one of those things that just kind of holds me back because one of the things I like about 3ds Max is the ability to make dialogues. Anyway, this here I have opened up is all the dialogues that you can, or controls that you can make on a dialogue, and these are like controls are like the buttons or a checkbox, color picker, combo box, drop-down box, text input, different types of buttons, map button, material button, pick button, sliders, radio buttons, spinners, stuff like that. And so it shows you each class. So you can click on a class. So you want to learn about checkboxes, and it will tell you about checkboxes. So this is the MaxScript reference manual. This one is the reference manual for the um, version 8 of 3ds Max, which is this one. Okay, this version came out in 2006, I believe. It's one of the older versions. Um, and basically, when basically when 3ds Max was purchased by Autodesk, I think in 2004 or 2005, Autodesk never updated the software in a major way. There's always been slight changes, and that's kind of been a good thing because no matter what version of 3ds Max, your knowledge will carry over across the years. Most of the Max scripts are mostly stable. Throughout the years, they've actually added more API functions in MaxScript, which if you try to use on an older version of Max, you might get a crash because it doesn't exist. But you can always make an equivalency, and the ones that they added to the newer versions, it's kind of far in between. There's not like a you rarely use them. I mean, one of the functions that I like to use is one that's called Append if unique. And it just means that you collect data that's only unique, so you don't have duplicated entries. Um, but aside from that, I mean, There hasn't been much changing of the API, so it's you could program on a dirt old version of 3ds Max and it would still work. So I'm going to try and do it in this version. I don't know how well it's going to go. I'm running Windows 10, and it has to emulate the DirectX 7 drivers, or DirectX 6 drivers, I don't know what it is, for 3ds Max. And the last time I tried this, it was very jerky, but we'll see. We'll see how this goes. I don't think it'll go well, but we'll see. So I'm doing this as proof that you can write in 3ds Max, and it's older than bones, and it'll still work, and it'll still work in the new 3ds Max. That show the compatibility, and I think if you compare this with Blender, you'll realize that there's a huge difference in compatibility. Blender wasn't written with a global plan ahead of it saying, oh, we want this and this and that and this and this, and they had teams of people writing this for years, and then it came out as a final product. It's always been written as you go, or as they've gone, and it's community. It's cobbled together by the community. So year after year, month after month, they just add a new feature, and it's a feature-breaking thing. It's groundbreaking. Yeah, great. Now we have this feature. It's amazing. But then you have this backward compatibility problem, which is kind of sucks. But it's good that they're adding those features. Whereas 3ds Max kind of died when they were purchased. Okay, so this is the manual, and you basically get all the information you need from the manual. So what I was looking at was the interface, user interface controls, or control types, that's right. And then it was showing me the different types of controls in here. Anyway, they give you this little snippet, so we're just going to copy this, but I'm going to change it a little bit because we don't want to create a utility. The utility is something that builds itself in the utility tab over here, and it will add itself to here. I think under this tab, it will then add itself into here, and you can add like whatever utility is you want to add to it. We're not going to do that. We just want to have a MaxScript that we can just boot up. Okay, and if you want to put it in there, you just replace one command with a different command, and now it'll turn into a utility. The nice thing about using the one we're going to be using is that it can be linked to a button or a macro that you can just toss on the top or something. So we'll go over that. So let's just start a MaxScript here. This is just like a plain text notepad, nothing too fancy. You press F11, you will get the Max listener. You can also go up to MaxScript here and click on this. It will show the MaxScript listener. And this is the console. This is where everything's going to print out, so you can see what's happening with your programs. We're going to cascade these so we can see them together. Okay. So now we're more or less just programming now. Now there's different ways that you can basically like write your code, I guess. Because I've never gone to school for this, I don't have a formal training on this. But I typically like to have any encapsulation tabbed. So it's tabbed away from the left edge of the screen. So when I see something, I see that this is the parent object, and this is the children inside of that parent object. Now there's a different style that I've seen, which is that it will look like this, where it's still tabbed, but the brackets are on either side, and they're pressed against the pane. So there's a variety of ways people have their own way of writing things. As well, there's some kind of etiquette to how people like to write things inside. But I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm just going to tell you that I'm going to tab things, and that's a personal preference. And you might see people use a different style of writing, and that's just their personal preference. All right, so this is just the snippet they give us, and this is going to shoot up in the Utilities tab. We're going to change this to what's called a rollout, and you'll see that a keyword will come up as blue. Okay, any strings are going to show up in this purple color. I think it's like a red maybe, or like a velvet. And then it's going to be stored as the variable UI items. So we're going to copy this. And at the end of the script, we're going to say create dialog. Did I spell that right? dialog? Oh yeah, that is the thing. It should have showed blue, but I don't know why it didn't. Anyways, when we run this, is it because it wasn't, I have to make this capital? Just kind of bugged me that it's not blue, but that's okay. Anyway, so how this is going to work is we've defined this thing called a rollout. That's a special class called rollout. We've provided it with its own variable name so that we can call it up. And then we gave it its own name so that it has just a practical name when it shows up. So you can call this whatever, right? It's just a label. And then inside of the encapsulation, the brackets, is all the code that goes inside of it, which we'll break down in a minute. Now, after this gets defined, it won't do anything. It'll just kind of sit there in memory. So we need to use another command to actually make it do something. So this one here called create dialog will actually make 3ds Max actually create it on the screen. So I'm going to actually bring this aside now. And to run this, we're going to go up to top and hit, where is it? Evaluate all. From now on, I'm just going to say execute, and that's just me pressing Control E, okay? So I'm just going to execute this now. And we get the dialog. So you can see we have up top here our label and all these little classes, which are just demonstration classes provided in the documentation as a way to understand and experience how different controls you have in 3ds Max. It's kind of cool. I didn't know that I could do that. Got your slider, spinner, radio. So I'll just break it down. So okay, so you have your basic button. Okay, this means when you click on it, you can have an event. I don't know if it's event driven, but when you click on it, it will catch that event. Let's say we'll call it an event for now. But yeah, when you click on something, you can consider that as something happening. Typically, they're called events. So when an event happens, such as you clicking, you can make 3ds Max do something. Okay. Same with the checkbox. Check button is different. It's a button, but when you click it, it stays clicked in. Color picker will bring up a color thing, so you can store a color value. The combo box, it's just basically a way of selecting an item in a box or in a list. A variant to this is a drop-down. You have a list, and you click on it, and you can look at your list and then click on an item in the list, and it'll go back up and show you only that item instead of having all of the items shown. An edit text box is just you can add text to it or edit text in it. A label is something that you can't edit. It's just there. It's just a label to label other controls, let's say. List box is slightly different than a combo box up here. Combo box, as you click on something, it allows you to change it up here like an edit box, like a text edit box. However, this one, it just allows you to click on a list. The map button will bring up the material browser. So I haven't actually used this at all. It's if you're going to develop, I guess, something for handling materials. Material button, similar thing. Pick button. This is, I believe, for picking things in the scene. So if we were to create a box, then I can click this button, and as I'm hovering over this box, I can then highlight this, and it will be entered into this button. So it's a way of acquiring a mesh object with the button. This doesn't really show it, but I'm pretty sure this is a progress bar. What it does is it would go zip when you would perform an operation. This is a radio button. What they do is you have a selection, and by clicking on one of the buttons, you can only have a single selection. So it's like a choice, A, B, or C kind of thing. Spinner lets you, change the value up to whatever. And slider is the same thing. It's like, excuse me, you don't see any numbers on the screen. It's just, it's just a slider. Like maybe I had a value here for like transparency of an item, and then you just kind of have to like, oh, I want kind of half, or like this. It's just a way of just not having a lot of numbers on the screen and just having kind of just like a feel to the dialogue. And this thing up here, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be an image, but it's not being shown. Maybe well, it is shown. It's black, but it's just a demonstration of how you can preview images on there, even though there's not really an image there. In the script, they just create just a bitmap. You have to look at the bitmap class, and you read that up, and it will tell you how to actually insert an image into this class, which then feeds into the this other class, and then you can have an image displayed. But those are more complex things, right? We'll get into some easier things, just like buttons and checkboxes, which are probably the most common that I use. Okay, so this is the dialog. Pretty simple. Yeah, if you wanted to add this into your UI, you simply just highlight everything, hold the left click, drag, and then drop it somewhere up in here. In this case, it creates this dialog. So I can close this now. And when I click this button, there's my MaxScript. I love it. It's brilliant. They don't have to have it here. Oh, yeah, let's go here. I have to cut off this macro code now. Let me just put this back where we had it. When you add the button up there, it adds a little macro loader. Okay, so we just brought this back here. I didn't really show the utilities. Utilities, if I spelled that right. Now if we run this, let me just make sure it doesn't crash. Yeah, it didn't work out because I have this down here. Pretty sure I did something wrong with the spelling. Utility, not utilities. There we go. Alright, then if I run that, now it's going to be over here under MaxScript, under what? And then there it is. It's actually built into the rollout side of the pane here. Now this is just a preference thing. I don't particularly like this thing. This is more or less like what you can do in Blender, I would suppose. Everything is just built into the UI. You don't have you don't have float boxes. So I actually prefer the float box because I actually have two monitors. So what I'll do is I'll take my application, I'll move it to the other screen. And now it's almost like I have a completely written program, not written in MaxScript, just like a separate application. It's just on another screen now. And I can use that for whatever I want, while I'm doing stuff in 3ds Max. So I typically don't like this type here. So I usually replace this with rollout. And that just becomes a float box, but you have to always include the create dialog command at the end so that your thing will actually appear. I don't know, is it called UI tests, I guess? Items. Ta-da! I like that. Now for this thing, I'm pretty sure it doesn't install things. I can't remember. I think as soon as you restart 3ds Max, I'm pretty sure this goes away. So if you wanted this to be more permanent, you have to save this into your startup folder. So in the 3ds Max installation folder, there will be a folder called startup scripts, and you would put your scripts in there, and they'll load up on startup, and they'll show themselves in here every time. But I'm pretty sure if I was to restart 3ds Max, this disappears. I don't think I can delete it once it's in here. Once it's in here, it's in here until we restart. Alright, so that's the demo. I'm going to go and do some practical uses with utility. Okay, so let's just start from scratch. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to make a button. And I don't know what to do here. Let's say we're just going to create a box in the scene, and we'll do something with the checkbox. So first thing we need to do is create the class called rollout. Okay. After that, we need to give it a variable name. I'm just going to call it test1. Then we have to give it a label. I'm just going to call it test1. And then after that, we need to create an encapsulation with brackets. And then now we can continue to write something. Now, if I want to include a button, I have to start by defining its class first. So its class is a button. I don't know why it's not highlighting. I know it's because it's the old version of 3ds Max, but I'm so used to the newer one where it actually highlights all the keywords. This would be considered what they call a keyword, and it's supposed to be highlighted. So if I go into the newer 3ds Max, I do a script and I do something called button. It's supposed to highlight like that, but that's okay. You get this idea of the keywords from here. This is bitmap, this is button, this is checkbox, so forth. But if you are using a newer 3ds Max, which I would assume you are, you will notice that it'll be a little bit easier for you because you will get highlights when you type in those key is it radio button or radios or I don't know. Anyway, you'll get that highlighting when you select a keyword or type a keyword. Anyway, so our class is button. We have to give that a variable, so I can call that button1, and then we give it a name. So we'll just call it click me. All right, and then let's make a checkbox because that's another common thing I like to use. And actually, you know what? Let's also make another another button. Just give me a second. Checkbox. Check one. Call this one. I don't know. Check me. And then we'll do another button, and we'll call that one. I could call it button two. Close. What else can we add here? Another thing that I like to do is, this is not shown in the samples, but I actually like doing it. And it's to create groups, and it's just like a little box that kind of encapsulates everything. So I'm going to create a group here, and I'm going to call it group 1. So our class is group. Our name of the group is called group 1, and then we can encapsulate a bunch of the controls. So we can put that inside, and I'm going to run this, and you can see what that's going to look like. So just we'll create the dialog. Test 1. And I will execute it. Bam. Okay. So you can see here we have the group 1, and it just draws a line, creates a little box around our button and our checkbox. And then you have our button outside the group called close. All right, clicking on any of these things will not do anything because we haven't programmed them yet. Okay. Now, when you look up in the help me here, you can look up each control, and particularly this area here has a hot link to each one of those pages, so we can look at the button one, and it will give us an example of how you would script it. So you would, you define it, and then you can have an event handler, which will handle the event when the button is pressed. So in this example, it shows you how that would work. You type the keyword on your variable name, the event is pressed, and then what happens is what you do in the encapsulation. So I'll write that in. So down here, we'll start writing our code. So on button 1, pressed, do the following, and then we make another encapsulation. And we'll just make a box. So we'll just say D, or B rather, not B, B for box. Okay, and this is another class, box. Box contains a bunch of parameters. So we type in box over here, you'll see the class for box. And that's how you just make a constructor for a box. It's just with the closed brackets, open and closed brackets. But if you wanted to specify a bunch of parameters, you can input them in. That's just a little more advanced, but we're just going to create a box. This is just creating a class here and assigning it to B. You don't have to do anything else. It just, once you assign it there, it'll just make the box. And then we'll make another checkbox, or we'll make one for the checkbox. And this one's a little bit different. It's on check one state change do. Okay, so this one's a little bit different. If we look up that here, checkbox is here, okay. Checkbox takes another parameter. So if we look at here it is. The event is on, that's keyword, your variable. Changed is the event. So I think I put that in right. I got it backwards. Okay. So on variable, the event is changed. And then the extra parameter is actually here. And what it does is it gives you the outcome of the changed state. So you typically put a variable in here, and then I'm just going to call it state. Okay, and then what's going to happen is we can then access the variable state in here. So I can go message box. That's another keyword. This displays a message on the screen. For example, we can make a little message here. Actually, let's not make it too complicated, okay? We'll just put the state here. And I think I need to convert this to a string because it's a different class. The checkbox isn't a string naturally. So we're going to use another command called asString. And what it's going to do is take the state, which is going to come down here, and it's converted into a string so that the system can send us a message, because message takes a string parameter. Anyway, so when we check it, it's going to tell us a state change. And then I need to program the last button, which is button 2. On button 2 pressed do. In this case, I think what we'll do is we'll just kill the dialog. So there's a special command for that called destroy dialog. And then we just pass it in the variable named test1. Alright, there we go. So we can run that. And so basically I can click this and it should create a box. Yay. I click this and it says that I've now changed states and the state is true. Okay. If I click it again, the state has become false. Okay. If I hit close, it closes down. So we can kind of change this around a little bit to make it a little more functional. So our checkbox can be random position. We can call this create box. We can come down in here and we do our box. We can do what's called an if statement. This is more fundamentals of programming, which I believe is discussed in here. I'm not sure which chapter it is. But an if statement is just a conditional statement. It's one of the more fundamental, basic things you do in programming. You take a variable and you test it, and then you, depending on what your result is, you can then perform something in the encapsulation. So this gives you an example of that. You just read through it, and it basically says, your if statement takes a true or false result. Depending on if it's true, then it will then pass into your encapsulation, or if it won't. So in this case, we can go if. We're going to get the outcome from our checkbox, so checkbox 1. And according to the class, if we go back to the checkbox, all right, there are parameters that we can have access to. Oh, excuse me, and that is we can type in .state to get the current state, or you can also type in .checked, which is the same thing. So we can go .state, that is if it's clicked or not clicked, checked on, I mean. So if state equals true, do the following, and then we have another encapsulation. And now we can do some work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to randomize the positions. So I'm going to take B, which is our box. This is also got class properties. It has a inherited class property, which is called node, and it has common properties, and these are discussed in here. All the common properties you have access to. There's a lot of them. There's a ton of them. But anyway, one of the properties is position, where you can actually move the position of let's say an object in 3ds Max. Another fun little function inside of 3ds Max is this one called random, which will randomize positions and stuff like that. Now, I'm not sure if it'll work with coordinates, but I will try, because I haven't actually tried it. But I will try. Actually, this should be like -10, I think. That makes sense to me. And 10, 10, 10. And I'll see if that works. I'm not sure. If there's a problem, we'll get some text in red that says that there was an error or a syntax problem. So let's run that again. So I'm going to hit, actually I probably should have deleted that box. Create box, goes in the same spot. We're going to hit random, create box, same spot. Okay. It's probably because this thing didn't do anything. Let me just check it in here. We can paste a single line in here and press the num key, enter key, and it will run just that one. So actually it should have worked actually. It should have randomized in a random spot, but I guess maybe the number wasn't big enough. Let me just put a larger number in here. Alright, let's try that again. Close that one. Create box. There we go. Yeah, it was just my number wasn't large enough. And we can continue to create them in like random spots, which is pretty cool. And if you don't want to, you just turn it off, and you can just keep creating them in the same spot or something. So anyway, that's just a quick, I mean, it wasn't very quick, but introduction to just dialogues. And, it's not for everyone, but I mean, if you like to customize your UI, I think it's really fun. And it's not something you can really learn overnight, but, I think you have to start at the design end of it and think, oh wow, it'd be really cool like to have this. Like I want to have a drop down. And then you just have to look for examples for that in the help me and look for, oh, is there the thing that does that? And most of the time, not always, 3ds Max will provide an example and you can just copy the example, paste it in, and then you have to read it, understand what it's doing, of course, because you're going to have to modify that code, but go in and you can modify the code to do whatever you want it to do for you. And it's one of those mountain climbing things. Once you get over that hurdle, you're like, wow, that's so cool. I can't believe I did that. And then you get used to it, and you do it again and again and again. It becomes obviously second nature. So anyway, that's just a basic overview. For myself, I don't do anything too complex. At least I try not to. Um, but if you have any questions, please send them my way, and I'll try to provide any answers I can if you're interested in creating dialogues. Anyway, thanks for watching, and have fun.